Millionaire arrives home early and can't believe what he sees the black cleaner doing. "My God in heaven, what is that person doing with my son?" The scream of horror echoed through Richard Blackwood's mansion when he caught his cleaning. Lady Kesha, teaching physical therapy techniques to his 8-year-old autistic son, Tommy. Instead, he was met with a scene that made his blood boil. The 32-year-old black maid was on the living room floor, patiently guiding Tommy through motor coordination exercises he had never seen before. "Tommy was having a meltdown, Mr. Blackwood," Kesha explained calmly, standing up and wiping her, hands on her uniform. "He hurt himself trying to climb the stairs by himself. I just helped him calm down with some breathing techniques." Richard watched his son, who for the first time in months was not banging his head against the wall or screaming inconsolably. Tommy was smiling slightly, his movements more coordinated than he had ever seen. "Breathing techniques," Richard laughed dismissively. "You're a cleaner, not a therapist? You weren't hired to experiment on my son." Kesha lowered her eyes, but Richard caught a strange gleam in her gaze. Not submission, but something that looked like knowledge, as if she knew something he was completely unaware of. "Of course, sir. I apologize. It won't happen again." "I certainly hope not. Your job is to clean, not pretend you know something about medicine." Richard took Tommy's hand harder than necessary. "Go finish your work." What Richard Blackwood didn't know was that he had just publicly humiliated a woman with a master's degree in occupational therapy and 15 years of experience working with autistic children. Kesha had lost her private practice 2 years earlier, due to racist lawsuits filed by her white competitors, forcing her to take cleaning jobs to support her family. As she finished vacuuming the living room carpet, Kesha watched Richard yell at Tommy for not being able to tie his own shoes, something she had discreetly taught the boy during her last 3 months working at the house. "Are you stupid or deaf, Tommy? It's simple." The child began to cry, slapping his hands against his ears in despair. Richard sighed impatiently and called the nanny to deal with it. At that moment, Kesha made a decision that would change their lives forever. She discreetly took out her cell phone and began filming the daily interactions between father and son. Every scream, every humiliation, every moment of emotional neglect. What that arrogant man had no idea of was that Kesha had connections he could never imagine, and that her little camera was documenting evidence that would soon become the most powerful weapon against his reputation as an exemplary father that he had so carefully cultivated on social media. 3 days after the incident, Richard Blackwood decided that a more severe lesson was necessary. He summoned all 5 female employees to a meeting in the main room with Kesha strategically positioned in the center as an example. "Ladies, I want to make one thing very clear," Richard began, pacing around the women like a predator. "Each of you has a specific role in this house. Cooks cook, nannies take care of children, cleaners clean." He stopped directly in front of Kesha. "And people who don't respect boundaries, well, they quickly find out that there are consequences." What followed was a calculated public humiliation. Richard announced that Kesha's salary would be cut in half to make up for the time wasted playing doctor, and that she would have to work extra weekends without additional pay. Worse still, he installed security cameras in every room to monitor inappropriate activities. "Oh, and one more thing," Richard smiled cruelly. "If I find out that anyone here is teaching my son anything without my express permission, that person not only loses her job, she loses much more than that." The other employees lowered their eyes, clearly intimidated. Kesha just nodded silently, but inside something was boiling. Not uncontrolled anger, but a cold, calculated determination that Richard could never understand. What that privileged man didn't know was that Kesha Williams had lost much more than a simple clinic. 2 years earlier, she had owned the most respected children's therapy center in the region with a 6-month waiting list and partnerships with 3 major hospitals. Her specialty was autistic children, and her success rate was revolutionary. It all came crashing down when a group of white therapists from the local medical elite, led by Dr. Jonathan Mills, launched a systematic smear campaign. They sued her for unlicensed medical practice, claiming that her non-traditional methods were dangerous. They bribed inspectors, forged complaints from non-existent parents, and used their political connections to destroy her professional reputation. The legal battle lasted 18 months. Kesha spent all her savings, lost her clinic, her apartment, and nearly her sanity. When she finally proved her innocence, it was too late. Her reputation was ruined, her savings wiped out, and no hospital or clinic would hire a controversial therapist. She was forced to take cleaning jobs to support her diabetic mother and pay off her lawyer's bills. But Kesha kept something her persecutors never imagined: compromising documents about their corruption, recordings of revealing conversations, and most importantly, a network of contacts that included investigative journalists, civil rights activists, and some very influential parents whose children she had successfully treated. While cleaning Richard's master bathroom that afternoon, Kesha smiled when she saw a notification on her cell phone. It was from Marcus Chun, an investigative journalist with Channel 12 News, who had covered her case years earlier and never stopped looking for evidence against the circle of medical corruption. "Kesha, I got access to the files you mentioned. Dr. Mills is under investigation by the FBI for medical fraud. I need to talk to you urgently about your evidence." That night, while Richard yelled at Tommy again for having trouble bathing, Kesha discreetly adjusted the mini camera she had installed in the playroom. She already had 47 videos documenting emotional neglect and, in some cases, clear psychological abuse. But what really made Kesha's blood run cold was hearing Richard on the phone with his wife. "That woman is getting too close to Tommy. I think I'm going to have to get rid of her soon. A black woman like that could give the boy the wrong ideas." There was the confirmation that Richard wasn't just negligent, he was consciously racist and cruel. Worse, he was planning to fire her before she could complete her true mission. Kesha smiled bitterly as she saved the recording on her cell phone. Richard Blackwood had made a fatal mistake in underestimating a woman who had already faced and survived a conspiracy far more sophisticated than his amateur arrogance. What that elite racist couldn't see was that every humiliation, every threat, every display of contempt was being meticulously documented by someone who knew exactly how to turn evidence into public justice. Kesha was no longer just a cleaning lady collecting evidence. She had become an emotional time bomb, and the clock was ticking. Kesha's real preparation began 3 weeks later when Marcus Chun finally managed to arrange a discreet meeting at a downtown cafe. The investigative journalist had covered her professional downfall 2 years earlier and had never stopped investigating the network of medical corruption that had destroyed her. "Kesha, I have news that will interest you." Marcus slid a manila folder across the table. "Dr. Jonathan Mills is under investigation by the FBI for health insurance fraud, but what I found out about Richard Blackwood will blow your mind." Inside the folder, documents revealed that Richard wasn't just an investor in the rival clinic. He had directly financed the smear campaign against Kesha, paying lawyers to fabricate the false accusations and bribing health inspectors. His motivation was purely racial. In internal emails, he wrote that he couldn't allow a black woman to dominate the elite child therapy market. "There's more," Marcus smiled bitterly. "Richard was planning to open a chain of child therapy clinics using the methods he stole from you. Your own methods, Kesha. He documented everything, thinking you'd never be able to prove the intellectual origin." Kesha felt a mixture of anger and satisfaction. She finally had the missing link to complete the puzzle of the conspiracy that had ruined her life. But Marcus had an even more shocking revelation. Richard is being considered for a position on the National Council for Child Health. If that happens, he will have the power to influence public policy for autistic children across the country. Meanwhile, at the Blackwood mansion, Richard intensified his campaign of systematic humiliation. He began timing how long it took Kesha to clean each room, publicly criticizing her efficiency in front of the other employees. Even worse, he began using Tommy as a tool for psychological torture. "Tommy, tell Kesha that people like her don't understand special children like you," Richard ordered during dinner, forcing the child to repeat cruel phrases that clearly he did not understand. The boy, confused and distressed, would look at Kesha with tears in his eyes, whispering, "I'm sorry," whenever his father wasn't looking. These were the moments Kesha documented most carefully. Not just Richard's cruelty, but the traumatic impact his methods had on Tommy. The turning point came when Kesha discovered that Richard kept a home office where he stored confidential documents about his medical investments. During a routine cleaning, she found contracts revealing that he had used privileged information about autism diagnosis to manipulate the stock market of pharmaceutical companies. Using a mini camera disguised as a pen, Kesha photographed hundreds of incriminating documents. Each page confirmed that Richard had turned the suffering of families with autistic children into a profit opportunity, betting against companies developing cheaper and more accessible treatments. But the most devastating discovery came in a phone conversation that Kesha accidentally recorded. Richard was discussing with a lawyer how to get rid of evidence related to the medical fraud case. "Burn everything related to the black woman. If she appears in our documentation, delete it as if she never existed." That night, Kesha called Marcus with a proposal that would change everything. "Do you want the story of the century? I have evidence that will bring down not only Richard Blackwood, but the entire network of medical corruption you've been investigating for years." "What kind of evidence?" Marcus asked, already sensing that something big was coming. Recordings of Richard confessing to crimes, documents showing market manipulation using confidential medical information, racist emails ordering my professional destruction, and best of all, Kesha smiled for the first time in months, videos of him psychologically abusing his own autistic son, proving that the same person who profits from the suffering of these children is incapable of caring for his own. Marcus was silent for a moment. "Kesha, this is pure dynamite. When do you want us to publish it?" "Next week, there's a charity gala for autistic children where Richard will receive an Exemplary Father of the Year award. How about we turn that award into the most embarrassing moment of his life?" The plan was taking shape, and Richard had no idea that every act of cruelty, every display of racism, every moment of neglect toward Tommy was being meticulously documented by a woman who had lost everything because of his greed, but who now had the tools to destroy him completely. While Richard slept peacefully that night, convinced of his superiority and impunity, Kesha worked late into the night organizing evidence that would turn his life into a public nightmare. The man who had enjoyed humiliating a mere cleaning lady was about to discover that he had chosen the wrong person to underestimate. The Beverly Hills Hotel's charity gala for autistic children was filled with the city's medical and business elite. Richard Blackwood, impeccable in his tuxedo, posed for photos alongside other philanthropists, eagerly awaiting the moment when he would receive the Exemplary Father of the Year award from the mayor. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the presenter, "we have a special surprise before the main award. Channel 12 News has prepared a touching documentary about the importance of parental care for autistic children." Richard smiled smugly, imagining it would be yet another story extolling his supposed philanthropic work. The lights went out and the giant screen lit up with the station's logo. What appeared next made Richard's blood run cold. Marcus Chen's voice echoed through the hall. "This special investigation reveals how a network of medical corruption systematically destroyed competent professionals to benefit unscrupulous investors. But first, let's see how one of the main architects of this conspiracy treats his own autistic son." The first video showed Richard yelling at Tommy. "Are you stupid or deaf, Tommy? It's simple." The child cried desperately as his father continued, "Stop crying like a baby. Normal children don't do that." A murmur of shock rippled through the hall. Richard tried to stand up, but Dr. Mills, sitting next to him, pulled him back. "Don't make a scene, Richard. It could get worse." But it got worse very quickly. The documentary alternated between scenes of Richard psychologically abusing Tommy and audio recordings of his phone conversations. Burn everything related to the black woman. If she appears in our documentation, delete it as if she never existed. The camera captured the exact moment when Richard realized that Kesha was sitting in the front row, elegantly dressed, watching his destruction with the serenity of someone who finally sees justice being done. "Jesus Christ," Richard whispered, breaking out in a cold sweat. "How did she—" The documentary continued with internal emails in which Richard wrote, "I cannot allow a black woman to dominate the elite child therapy market. Do whatever it takes to destroy her." This was followed by bank documents showing payments to corrupt lawyers and bribed inspectors. Dr. Mills tried to discreetly leave the hall, but Marcus Chen appeared on stage. "Dr. Jonathan Mills, please remain in your seat. The FBI has some questions for you." Federal agents who had entered silently during the screening positioned themselves strategically throughout the hall. The trap had been set with surgical precision. The mayor, visibly shocked, took the microphone. "In 20 years of public life, I have never witnessed such a display of hypocrisy and cruelty. Mr. Blackwood, the award you were to receive tonight will be redirected to the victim of your criminal actions." Kesha took the stage to thunderous applause. "My name is Kesha Williams. I am a doctor of occupational therapy with 15 years of experience treating autistic children. 2 years ago, this man financed a conspiracy to destroy my clinic because he couldn't stand to see a black woman thriving in his area of financial interest." She showed her diploma to the entire audience. "While he humiliated me by calling me a mere cleaning lady, I documented how he psychologically abused his own son, the same child he used as an excuse to steal my therapeutic methods and open competing clinics." Richard was in a panic, trying to argue. "This is a setup. She's lying." Marcus Chun returned to the microphone. "Mr. Blackwood, we have 47 videos of you abusing Tommy, dozens of audio recordings confessing to crimes, racist emails, and bank documents proving medical fraud and stock market manipulation. Your own home was the scene where we collected all the evidence." The audience watched in absolute silence as more details of the conspiracy were revealed. Richard had not only destroyed Kesha professionally, but used privileged information about autism diagnoses to manipulate investments, profit from the suffering of vulnerable families, and sabotage more accessible treatments. "The most ironic thing," Kesha continued with impressive calm, "is that during the months I worked in your home, Tommy made extraordinary progress with my methods. Progress that Mr. Blackwood attributed to the expensive therapists he hired, unaware that I was secretly helping his son develop." She showed videos of Tommy walking with better coordination, saying new words, and even smiling, transformations that had taken place while Kesha was working in the home, but which Richard had never noticed. While he was publicly humiliating me, his autistic child was thriving under the care of someone he considered too incompetent to understand medicine. FBI agents approached Richard, who was still trying to deny everything. "You don't understand. I am Richard Blackwood. I finance half the hospitals in this city. That's exactly why your arrest is so important," replied Special Agent Rodriguez. "Richard Blackwood, you are under arrest for medical fraud, market manipulation, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to destroy competitors through criminal means." As Richard was handcuffed in front of 400 members of high society, Kesha remained on stage, dignified and serene. "I didn't do this for revenge," she said into the microphone. "I did it for all the families he hurt, for all the children who suffered from inadequate treatment because he sabotaged qualified professionals, and especially for Tommy, who deserves a father who loves him for who he is, not who sees him as a source of profit or a reason for shame." The last image Richard saw before he was led out of the hall was Kesha receiving a standing ovation from the city's entire medical elite, the same elite that 2 years earlier had rejected her credentials out of racial prejudice. The man who had enjoyed humiliating a mere cleaning lady discovered in the worst possible way that he had chosen the wrong person to underestimate. Kesha was not just a survivor. She was a strategist who turned every moment of humiliation into fuel for perfect, devastating justice. 6 months after the night that destroyed Richard Blackwood, Kesha Williams was back where she always should, have been, at the top of her medical profession. The new Dr. Kesha Williams Child Therapy Center occupied a 4-story building in the heart of the city, funded by a combination of ethical investors, donations from grateful families, and, ironically, Richard's own assets confiscated during the criminal proceedings. "Dr. Williams, we have an 8-month waiting list," reported her assistant Jennifer, a young woman who had been fired from Richard's old clinic for refusing to falsify medical reports. "And we've received 3 more franchise proposals from other states." Kesha smiled as she watched the children playing in the therapeutic garden through her office window. Among them was Tommy Blackwood, now 9 years old, who visited the center 3 times a week under the custody of his Aunt Martha, Richard's sister, who had taken custody of him after his father's arrest. Tommy's development was extraordinary. Without Richard's constant pressure and yelling, the boy had blossomed like a flower finally seeing sunlight. He spoke in complete sentences, made eye contact, had completely stopped banging his head against walls, and most importantly, smiled every day. "Aunt Martha, can I show Dr. Kesha the drawing I made?" Tommy asked, running down the hall with a motor coordination Richard never believed possible. Martha Blackwood, a kind 50-year-old woman who had always questioned her brother's cruel methods, watched with tears in her eyes. "Kesha, I don't know how to thank you. In 6 months, Tommy has made more progress than in 8 years of expensive treatments Richard paid for." Meanwhile, Richard Blackwood was serving his 12-year sentence for medical fraud, market manipulation, and child abuse in a federal penitentiary. His companies had been dissolved, his assets confiscated, and his reputation was so destroyed that even the most expensive lawyers in town refused to work on his appeal. Dr. Jonathan Mills, his accomplice in the medical conspiracy, had lost his license permanently and was working as a telemarketing attendant, trying to pay off the $1 million fines imposed by the FBI. The network of corruption they had built was completely dismantled, resulting in the arrest of 17 medical professionals and the opening of investigations in 5 other states. Marcus Chun had won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism for his coverage of the conspiracy, with special mention for how he documented the transformation of a victim into an agent of justice. "The story of Kesha Williams," he wrote, "proves that true revenge is not destroying your enemy, but building something so great that their evil becomes irrelevant." Most satisfying to Kesha were not her professional achievements, but the letters she received every day. Families across the country shared stories of autistic children finally receiving dignified and effective treatment. Mothers who cried with relief at seeing their children progress. Fathers who learned to love their children exactly as they were. "Dr. Williams," Tommy said one afternoon, interrupting an important meeting, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "Why didn't my daddy like me the way I am?" Kesha knelt down to Tommy's height, choosing her words carefully. "Your daddy was very sick, Tommy. Not sick in his body, but sick in his heart. He didn't know how to love people who were different from him." It was Harvard University offering her a professorship in the Department of Child Therapy, along with a research lab with an unlimited budget to develop new treatments for autistic children. "Dr. Williams," said the dean on the phone, "your story has inspired an entire generation of medical students. We want you to train the therapists of the future." But the call that moved her the most came from an unlikely source, Martha Blackwood herself. "Kesha, I need to tell you something. Richard confessed to me during his last visit to prison," Martha said, her voice breaking. "He finally admitted that you were the best therapist Tommy ever had. He said he knew it from day one, but his pride and prejudice were stronger than his love for his own son." "And what did you say?" Kesha asked. "I said it was too late for regrets." But thanks to your courage and intelligence, Tommy now has the chance at happiness that Richard never gave him. A few weeks later, Kesha was at the grand opening of her 5th clinic when she received one last surprise. The mayor announced that the street where the main center was located would be renamed Dr. Kesha Williams Avenue in honor of a woman who turned injustice into hope and revenge into healing. During her acceptance speech, Kesha looked out at the packed audience, doctors who had once ignored her, families whose children she had helped, journalists who had documented her journey, and Tommy sitting in the front row next to Martha, applauding enthusiastically. 2 years ago, Kesha began, a man tried to destroy me because he couldn't stand to see a black woman thriving in his territory. He used his money, his connections, and his privilege to try to erase my professional existence. The audience was completely silent. But he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated not only my ability, but more importantly, my determination. Every day I spent cleaning his house while he humiliated me. I was learning, documenting, preparing, not to get revenge on him, but to prove that no amount of privilege can defeat competence combined with perseverance. I want everyone to know that Dr. Kesha saved me, Tommy said suddenly, standing up. Not only did she teach me how to speak better and walk better, but she taught me that I can be happy being myself. The ovation was deafening. Kesha wiped away tears as she watched Tommy, who 2 years earlier had been a traumatized and neglected child, now radiating joy and self-confidence. The best revenge, Kesha continued when the applause died down, is not to destroy those who hurt you. It's to build something so great, so beautiful, so important that their evil becomes irrelevant. It's to prove that you weren't just better than they thought you were. You were better than they could ever be. That night, as Kesha reviewed plans to expand the clinics to other countries, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her there. Richard Blackwood had tried to erase her existence, but he had ended up creating the perfect conditions for her to become one of the most respected child therapists in the world. Her phone vibrated with a message from Tommy. Dr. Kesha, thank you for teaching me that being different is being special. When I grow up, I want to help children like you helped me. Kesha smiled, realizing that her true revenge had not been Richard's imprisonment or her own professional rise. Her greatest victory was knowing that a child who could have grown up traumatized and full of anger now had hope, self-love, and a desire to help others. Richard Blackwood tried to bury Kesha Williams, but he forgot that buried seeds don't die. They grow, multiply, and turn into entire forests.